Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Genetic Tools to Maximise Calf Value. Today we've got Marco Winters and Alex Brown here to talk about it. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Marco first.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Marco Winters. I'm head of animal genetics at AHDB, and my role within AHDB is to look after all the dairy genetic and genomic evaluations. And well, hopefully today I'll give you a bit of a flavor of what's going on, and specifically on calf rearing.
Thank you. Alex.
I'm Alex Brown. I'm the Senior Beef Breeding and Genetics Manager at AHDB. So my area of expertise is beef genetics. I look after the AHDB National Beef Evaluation and then provide technical support and advice to stakeholders in terms of anything beef breeding and genetics.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we've got a little bit of housekeeping just before we get going. All attendees will be muted. We're running this webinar from about 9:30 start through until about 10:30 finish. About 35 minutes for presentations, around 25 minutes for questions afterwards. If you're unable to make the webinar, it will be recorded. So if you need to duck out at any moment, then that's not a problem. We'll keep questions coming in throughout. So as and when you've got questions, feel free to fire those into the question box, which I'll explain about in a moment. And then we will answer the questions at the end of the webinar. So to ask questions, click the orange arrow on the box. It will bring out the question box for you to type your question in, and we'll store those up and answer those at the end. So with that, Marco, if you're happy, would you like to take it away?
Yep, just get that going. Okay. So yeah, like I said in my introduction, the part of the presentation that I'll be talking about is to talk about breeding the best dairy replacement calves, and then Alex will follow me, and she'll talk about how to choose the best beef sires to optimize the value of your herd. So the first part really is to think about what do we need to think about when it comes to breeding replacement calves. It goes from understanding some of your breeding needs to how you end up selecting your heifers and the best bulls to breed from. Also a bit of a discussion on sexed versus conventional semen, and then obviously beef semen, how you can maximize your value. But to kick it off, I just wanted to put up the slide that you may have seen many times before, but it really is good to remind ourselves that when we talk about performance, and performance in this sense isn't just how much does she milk or what does she look like, but it's also how well is the calf, what's the calf figure, what's the calving ease of those calves. A lot of the health, longevity, fertility traits, all of that is performance, and all of those are underpinned by the genetics of that animal. And obviously the environment also comes into it, and this week there's quite a lot of talk also about how we manage calves, but it is important that we understand that if we can improve genetics of the calves that enter our herd in the first place, it becomes an awful lot easier to manage those calves when they mature. But also if we want to slow or remove the cost out of our systems, we can do that by improving genetics and still maintain our performance at the same level. So understanding that genetics element and making sure that the foundations of the herd are right is very, very critical, and it is very important to think about when it comes to breeding decisions. And the other thing, obviously, when it comes to genetics is that whatever we do in genetics, it's a permanent fix within the herd, because the calves that we breed are going to be the dams of the future, and their genetics will be passed on to subsequent generations again. Now, this is good news when it comes to traits that we select well on and we want to improve, but it also is a warning for you, because if you don't get your decisions right in this current mating that you're working on, you can build up problems for the future, because those genetics will stay in your herd. So it's not something to be flippant about, I guess, and really do think about the genetics you bring into your herd, because these are permanent and long-term. And also they are cumulative, because every generation, when we add better genetics on top of it, we will keep on improving. And it's I think it's no surprise when we look at the cows of today how much they have changed over the years because of the way that we've bred them. And I guess it's the power of genetics that really comes through when we look at the current national herd. And when it comes to the power of genetics, there's obviously already a lot that we have done for production and type, and I think that's well understood. We know that if we use the better bulls for production or conformation, we do end up with progeny that are higher producing and have got more sustainable or more functional conformation traits. Health was initially slower in uptake. When we started introducing these about, well, it's about 20 years ago now, 25 years maybe, when we started talking about health traits. And initially everybody was skeptical, but I think nowadays people understand very well that we can also breed for these lower heritability health traits. And somatic cell count probably is a good example, which again, initially people were reluctant to use, but nowadays when you look at bulls being marketed, you'll find very few bulls on the list that have still got positive somatic cell counts, because we really do want to reduce it, and have been very successful in reducing somatic cell counts on farm. Similarly, fertility index, 2005 we launched that one. Again, skepticism, thinking it was all management, but nowadays again it's very difficult to market a bull that's poor for fertility, because we do know that those bulls really do contribute to an improved fertility of the daughters. And this graph really just illustrates, I guess, how genetics is improving the national herd. The dotted line here is the looking at year of calving and the national population of those years. The dotted line is the average genetic merit for calving interval, which we plotted. So we really were at our worst point around 2009, 2010, and since then have gradually been improving. And this article, or this graph, was based on an article that I wrote back in 2018. At that time, we could plot the actual calving intervals on top of it, and could show that, well, calving intervals follows the genetics of the national herd. And we also made a forward prediction saying, well, actually, we do know which bulls are being used. We know which calves are in the pipeline, so we can predict where calving intervals are going to be in the future. And well, and this star here indicates the calving intervals that were published by NMR as part of their KPI benchmarking report. And that shows that the calving intervals of today's national herd sits roughly at the point that we expect it to be, given the genetics that we're feeding into it. So it's a very powerful confirmation that if we get genetics right, we really do make a difference, and we can impact the performance of our animals in the future. Well, obviously there's a lot of stuff we want to think about, and when it comes to breeding better replacements, these are things you have to consider. But for today's talk, there's too much detail, and I won't go into all of it, but you can find information on our website if you want to understand more of what's available. But all of these things you will think about on a, well, possibly a daily basis. Say, well, how can I improve my production? How can I tackle my longevity or replacement rates, fertility, a lot of the health and lameness traits, up until feed efficiency, which is also in terms of breeding becoming much more important. And for all of these, we now have genetic indexes that can help us tackle these. We're very familiar with production traits, and I've already mentioned the somatic cell count and fertility traits. But nowadays we also have lameness indexes which can help us reduce lameness, and it's been proven to work very effectively. And more recently also the introduction of feed advantage, a feed efficiency index, to help us improve feed efficiency of our animals. So these tools are out there for you to use, and it can be overwhelming if it's new to you, but these are very, very powerful, and it's a luxury that we are able to target really our genetics going forward so effectively. So to make it easier for you, we have got various overall indexes, and again today I'm not going to go into the detail, but again you can find information on our website. But I'm sure, well, I'd like to think you're probably familiar with our profit indexes. So PLI, Profitable Lifetime Index, has been around for a long time, within breed index for all year-round calving herds specifically, and that ranks our bulls in terms of, well, how much do we expect the daughters to be profitable going forward, and that has been proven time and again to really reflect on farm. Last year we did a piece of work with Promar, which again reiterated that herds who have got a higher genetic merit, so a higher PLI average, also with the herds that are making bigger margins, and these numbers do translate onto on-farm financial performance. And we also have two block calving specific indexes, SCI and ACI, to target, well, the specific genetics needed in those types of systems, and that is in a crossbreed system to allow you to also select bulls from different breeds if you are crossbreeding. Now, last year we also introduced two specific targeted indexes. The first one being the healthy cow index, and what we did there is really have an index that focuses just on health, fertility, and longevity, and it's a very good tool if you want to improve the health of your animals in general. So look out for that healthy cow index to help you target those. And also last year we introduced the Enviro Cow Index. Now that's maybe a new index that's, well, I'm sure most of you will start to think about in terms of carbon footprinting and looking after the footprint of your farm. And that index is specifically targeted to say, well, what kind of genetics do we need if we want to lower the carbon footprint of every kilogram of milk that leaves the herd? It focuses very heavily on production longevity, but also importantly feed efficiency. About a third of the index is made up of improving the feed efficiency, because we know that if we can feed less for more, that will, well, it's good for your financial sustainability, but also good for the environmental sustainability. So it's an index probably worthwhile looking into when it comes to it. So how do you, well, go about then selecting your best replacement, which I guess the part of my talk was really about. And it's a 3-point plan to break it down. So the first one is to understand your herd's strengths and weaknesses. What is it you really want to improve? Where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years time? And how can genetics help you get there? As I've already alluded and highlighted earlier, it is important to think about the genetics being the foundations of your herd. So there may be other on-farm improvements you want to make, but if you know where you want to be, you also have to think about the genetics you want to bring into your herd. And I'm gonna just show you the herd genetic report summary, because that can be a very effective tool in just highlighting strengths and weaknesses of your herd compared to the national average, and therefore highlight maybe areas you should specifically think about. Then the next part is to think about, well, which females are going to be the ones that I want to breed replacements from. So which females have already got the qualities that I want to continue to breed into my herd or multiply into my herd. Think about, well, whether you want to breed from your maiden heifers or your cows, and also whether genomic testing can help you. So if you genomically test your calves, will that give you better information on maiden heifers and really pinpoint the best genetics to breed from? And then finally, the discussion on, well, how do you end up choosing the bulls, thinking about sex versus conventional, and then Alex will specifically also talk about choosing the right beef bulls to maximize the value of your calf crop. So the first thing is, well, is the breeding goal, and I think it is fundamental. It's quite often forgotten, or, well, not thought about maybe enough. We too often rely on our breeding advisors to just tell us which bulls are available and to buy semen of what they believe are the right best bulls. But I do really urge you to think about your breeding goals, and this picture that I put up here is really to also ensure that you write down what you think about. And the reason I encourage you to write it down is because it then helps you reflect on it over time. So if in your farm office you just pin it on the wall or write it on the whiteboard if you've got it, it reminds you when you, well, look at it periodically to say, actually, what were my goals? And you can change them if you think, actually, I've rethought about it, and maybe some of these priorities are higher. And try to narrow it down to the top 3 or top 5 priorities, because we don't really need 20 priorities, because it makes life very difficult. So think about your main things you want to improve, whether that's longevity, fertility, your fat or protein percentage to meet your milk contract, or indeed feed efficiency. And that can help you focus the mind, but it also can help you for advisors that come on farm. So if your feed advisors know what your breeding goals are, or your breeding advisors know what it is, or even your vet or other consultants that come on farm, if they know what you're trying to achieve, you can also have a discussion with them, whether they agree with you or whether they've got other views on, well, maybe what should be a priority in the herd, given what they know about your herd. And the vet can be a really good talking point. So I do encourage you to write it down and have the discussion with other people who work on your farm or work with you. And one of the tools that can help you to establish your breeding goal is the herd genetic report. And this is a report that's available for milk recorded herds through AHDB. So if you are milk recording, then make sure you do use the information that is available, because what it can do is really give you a snapshot of your herds. It's here I've just summarized 2 reports that it shows you when you log in. So the first one is a breakdown by age group. So it's the milking herd and the young stock. We also list, and it gives the breakdown of the PLIs, the healthy cow and enviro cow I've talked about, but also a lot of the individual components, production and health traits. And this report here at the bottom, probably I find the most useful for understanding where the herd sits, because what this is a benchmark report of your herd against the whole of the national herd. And for each of these highlighted blocks, that's where this specific example herd sits. So we can see that the herd sits, well, is about average for PLI, so probably can do a better job in selecting for it. It's above average for healthy cow and enviro cow, but for production traits, it maybe could do better. In particular, fat percent, it's not doing as well as maybe it should do. And it depends on the milk contract whether that is a priority or not. But if you get paid from components, this herd really has to focus on finding bulls that improve the fat percentage. And on the other hand, this herd is doing really well for lifespan and even traits like maintenance. And and maybe we just want to make sure that we use bulls and find the right heifers to maintain that level and we don't go backwards. But it shouldn't necessarily be a high priority trait for further improvement. So it's an easy tool to find your strengths and weaknesses compared to other herds, and therefore can really help you to determine your own breeding goal. It is available to third parties. We get a lot of vets and other consultants, also milk buyers now trying to access this information so they understand, well, what is it that my client or the farm that I work with needs, and how can I help as an advisor to help improve that situation. So it's a useful discussion tool to well, have that as part of your discussion with a breeding advisor, to say, well, give me bulls that improve my needs, and this is my well, my current situation. What it also does is give you a breakdown of individual cows on your farm, so you can look at individual females. This one is for the milking report, but there is also a young stock report you can look at. The report has the usual filtering at the top, so you can filter out animals maybe you really want to select to breed your replacements from, or indeed highlight animals that are maybe should be culled out of the herd because they haven't got the right genetics. And that filtering tool will have highlighted some of the traits here, but there are more if you want to select on it, and there's options to select for other traits that may be your priority. You can also reorder it to find, well, bulls that are, or cows that are particularly good for one of these indexes that are your priority traits. And I'd encourage you to look at it. And when it then comes to finding the bulls or the cows to breed the replacements from, once you've set your breeding goal, it should be fairly easy to narrow down on those females that have got the genetics that you've highlighted as being important, and therefore really are the candidates to breed to conventional semen or sex semen to breed dairy replacements from. Now for young stock, we've got a very similar report. If you're not genomically testing, it will give you a parent average, so it's a half sire, half dam, which is useful, but it may be worthwhile considering genomically testing your female cows, because what genomics does is really pinpoint on the genomic level how confident we are that, well, the production may be better than parent average or worse, and similarly for fertility and all of the other traits that are being listed there. And it can really help you to increase the reliability, accuracy of pinpointing the exact genetics you should be breeding from, and in doing so make more rapid genetic progress. And this slide just, well, highlights, I guess, a bit of work that we did earlier in the year, where we looked at herds that, well, participated very strongly in genomic testing, so over 75% of the females on farm were genomically tested, versus farms that really didn't engage with genomic testing, so less than 25% of their animals genomically tested, or indeed 0% of animals genomically tested. And then when we looked then at the genetic progress of the herds, all of these herds pretty much started at the same sort of level. We can see a little bit of a deviation already. 2012 is when we introduced genomics in the UK. So possibly what this highlights is that herds who have engaged with genomic testing may have been already more on the ball or more interested in genetics in general. But certainly those that have engaged with genomic testing are making much more rapid genetic progress than the herds who haven't yet. All of these obviously have got access to the same sort of sires out there, and probably are, well, having the same sort of replacement rates on farm. But what genomics does is really pinpoint which animals you're going to breed from, and therefore can really select the best females for the future, thereby increasing the genetic merit of your herd. And as I said earlier, that will have an impact on your bottom line, because we do know that herds who have got a better genetic merit on average also are the better financially performing herds. And so genomic testing can help you just to be more targeted, more precise, and make more rapid genetic progress. And just as a reminder, just because we get a lot of questions there, well, who should we use? Because there's a lot of genomic providers out there. Now, our advice is just talk to them about what service they provide, what costs they charge for the genomic testing, because ultimately all of the evaluations that they provide to you are powered by ourselves. So AHDB will receive the genotypes from all of these providers. We run them through our system, and we give back to them the evaluations on the UK base, which then ultimately come back to you in some sort of report or well, tool that they make available to you. So it's all of these will be as reliable as each other, and all of them will be running through our evaluation system, and therefore do look out for that genomic information and the PLI that comes back to you. Well, the next point then, once you've established your breeding goal, you've identified the females that are your priority females to breed from because they meet your breeding needs. Then it comes to buying semen that well, needs to be used in your farm. And it is important, and I've highlighted here that you buy semen that's important for you. So two things: buy semen, don't be sold semen. It's you should be in charge of buying the semen that comes to your farm. And it also should be semen that's applicable to your herd. Every herd has got slightly different needs. Don't just rely on the bull that's hot at the moment or the bull that's on offer by the breeding company you're working with. It's very important you choose sires that suit your breeding needs. And if you've written down the breeding goal, you can talk to breeding advisors and ask them which bulls will suit that they sell that suit your breeding needs. And because getting that semen, that correct semen in the tank is a very critical process. It's probably one of the most important things you need to do because if you get that step wrong, well, it's unlikely your herd will progress because you're starting from a more difficult point, no matter how well you're selecting your females to breed from. And then the other point to consider is how many replacements you need. So how many, well, what's your replacement rate? So therefore, how many female calves do you need to breed? And therefore, which animals are you going to breed? Think about whether you're going to be comfortable using sex semen or whether you want to rely on conventional semen for the bulls that are out there. And obviously, once you've established the number of females you're going to breed to dairy semen, then have to think about, well, what beef semen do I now need for the bottom end of my herd or the rest of my herd to maximize value? And Alex will talk about that point specifically. So when it comes to sex versus conventional, I guess it's just good to realize that in the UK, the vast majority of dairy inseminations are already sex semen because, well, A, it makes sense for genetic progress. If we really can accelerate, identify the best females and make sure we get female replacements from them, it's good. It makes economic sense that way. But obviously also we've got the issue of the bull calf, the dairy bull calf, which doesn't always have an outlet. And if we can reduce the numbers of bull calves that are being born, which may not have a market, that's also useful. And then finally, if we can, well, really narrow down the female replacement, it offers a lot of opportunities to get high value beef cross calves from your herd. So it's as a total picture, it makes complete sense to maximize the use of sex semen on your elite females, and then maximize the opportunities of beef semen on the rest of the herd to generate a good, well, an extra cash flow from the calf crop coming through. I also want to highlight just the companies who participate in this. We run this every year, and it's, I guess, a thank you to the companies who do participate, and maybe for the companies who aren't yet, to encourage them to become part of it, because this is very powerful information that helps us to highlight how the industry is changing over time. Now, as a consequence of extra sex semen, obviously we also get a lot of extra beef semen. So nearly 50% of the national herd is now being bred to beef, and I guess when it comes to well, beef going through abattoirs, around about 60% of the beef kill now originates from the dairy herds. It's a significant proportion, and therefore also there's a bit of a discussion in the supply chain to how much dairy should contribute to quality of beef. Well, now I just want to highlight two specific traits to improve calf value, because essentially that's what this week is all about, but also the webinar is to talk about calf value. Now, the things that we already understand, things like calving ease, we know we need to find well, bulls that are easy calving, because if the cow is a difficult calving, it makes, well, that subsequent lactation more difficult. So think about calving ease of these bulls. We also have a gestation length index, which can really find you bulls that have got a shorter gestation length, and specifically for block calving herds that could be important. But the two I want to highlight is calf survival and dairy carcass index. So calf survival, well, it's an index, as the name suggests, that really says, well, which of these bulls can breed calves that have got a better probability of survival. And there's a lot of reasons why calves die on farm, and certainly some of that is genetics. In general, we know that, well, round about just under 10% of heifers don't make it to 1 year of age, and that's a significant loss and a significant cost to any dairy farm. Because if you're breeding your replacement heifers or your replacement calves, you really want to make sure that these stay on farm and don't die before they reach the, well, serving age and get to the milking herd. Now, the majority of these die within the first month of calving, so there's probably more stress on these calves because of all of the new challenges that are facing them. And if we can improve the quality of the genetics for those calves to be able to withstand some of those stresses, we can also improve the survival rate of these calves. Obviously, a lot of improvement is already happening through management. And again, this week, there will be webinars and meetings to talk about rearing of calves and the way you make sure that you improve their survival chances. But we can also address this directly through improved genetics. And the way we do that is by using BCMS data. Every animal that gets tagged in BCMS also has to be notified if they die. So we do know which animals are tagged and then, well, when they die. We don't rely just on the BCMS pedigree data because we know that that's not always complete, but because all of these animals all have got dams that exist in the national systems, the milk recording system, the herd books, we can also pick up pedigrees of these animals through national evaluations that already exist. So that's how we use this BCMS data. We just use the ear tag and whether the animal is alive or dead, but the pedigree actually essentially comes from our national systems. And we got just over 4.5 million calf records in our analysis, and every year obviously that grows as more calves enter the system. And we look at survival between tagging and 300 days. So the first year where the majority of losses occur in our calf survival genetic index. Well, just to highlight some of the effects that we have to correct for, we do know that calves that are born in springtime or summertime generally have a better survival chance than calves that are born in winter time. We tend to have more calf losses in the winter months. And similarly, we know that calves that are born from younger dams generally have a stronger chance of dying than those that are born of older dams, possibly because of easier calving, but there could be other reasons for it. And then finally, we also know that, well, twins have a stronger probability of problems after calving. And so we correct for all of these effects in a model so we can really narrow down on what part is due to genetics, which part is due to the environmental effects that are being, of the stresses that are being put on these calves. And the genetic index that we publish is, well, roughly gives us a scale of -6%, so 6% less chance of survival versus 6% more chance of survival. And it may look small, but if you look at the differences between these, that's a 12% difference in terms of survival ratings. And this is looking at the bulls and then their progeny, subsequent progeny. So our bad bulls, some of those have only got a 75% chance of survival of progeny versus our very best bulls who are, well, we're above the 90%, and I said earlier, roughly 10% of calves die within the first months, but we can improve that by breeding better genetics. And because these, again, because genetics are permanent and cumulative, if we can continuously breed for better survival ratings, we should be able to push that up quite significantly just by using better genetics. So look out for that calf survival index if you've got an issue or if you've got a problem keeping your calves on farm. And then the final one I just want to highlight before I then lead into Alex to talk more specifically about beef is we also do have a dairy specific carcass index available. So we can pinpoint which dairy sires give us a better carcass, and that's mainly focusing on carcass conformation, average daily carcass gain of prime slaughter age animals. Again, it's expressed on the scale of -5 to +5 roughly, with the -5 being the bad ones, +5 being the good ones. And maybe to most dairy producers, that's not as important to them, as not as interesting. But if you're rearing your own replacements, or if you're locked down with TB and you are forced to rear some of your replacement calves, it may be an index to look out for to say, oh, how can I improve that, at least the value of the calves that I am rearing out of my dairy herd. This is specifically looking at dairy bulls, and Alex will talk to you a bit more now about how beef genetic indexes can also help you to identify the best beef sires in your breeding program.
Okay, thank you very much, Marco. So yeah, previously we've focused mainly on how you get the best value out of calves that you're going to use as your replacements. But obviously herds with a replacement rate of 100% are probably very low, if not, you know, unicorns. So now we're going to be talking about a little bit about the other calves that you have, which are going to be going into the beef supply chain. And as Marco mentioned, with 60% odd of beef now coming from the dairy herd, it's a really important thing for you to be thinking about. So as well as being dairy producers, you actually are also meat producers. And as the people that are breeding these calves that are going to go into the beef supply chain, it's actually yourselves that have control over the genetic potential of these calves in terms of their carcass value as well. So what's the goal in terms of beef production? Well, this is an example of a classification grid. When we're looking at carcass value, processors are obviously looking for carcasses that are within a specific weight range, but they're also looking at animals that whose carcasses fit the right place on this classification grid, where there are higher prices because there is more demand. So down the left-hand side, we've got our conformation classification, which goes from E for excellent at the top, really well muscled, down to P for poor at the bottom. And then along the top, we're looking at fat class, and that goes from 1, which is extremely lean, to a 5H, which is extremely fat. So I'm just going to pose a question to you and just give you a few seconds to think about it, which is what it would be interesting to think about what proportion of carcasses in the UK you think are within the specification that is required by the processors. So when I say in spec, then what I mean is they have the right fat class and right conformation that people would expect. So those that are out of spec would either have too poor conformation, they would be too fat, or they could be both. Just hold it there for a second with that thought. So in 2021, it was just over 60% of carcasses in spec. So we've got almost 40% out of spec, and the majority of those animals that weren't hitting where we wanted them to be was that they were lean, but they were of poor conformation. So it's really that muscling that we need to try and improve. So if we then move on, we've really got an opportunity to harness the power of national data sets in the UK. So as Marco mentioned earlier, regardless of the trait that you're interested in, our performance is a combination of an animal's genetics plus the environment in which they are raised. And we can make cumulative and permanent gains by improving the genetic potential of our animals. Now, we've got loads of sources of data on all 3 of these things. We've got information on performance, whether it comes from on-farm records, whether it comes from abattoirs. Genetics we get through the pedigree, that might be through BCMS, it might be through breed societies, through milk recording, and again, all of these sources will give us information about the environmental factors that affect these traits as well. And what is really valuable to us is that we can actually link all of these sources of data and match them to the same animals because of the UK ear tag. So if we can draw sort of data owners and data providers together, we have a really, really powerful data source that we can then use to carry out genetic evaluations and give people information on how they can really choose the best animals for their system to maximise value. Next slide, please, Marco. So I'm just going to talk about an example of how we have done this. So we've been working with SRUC and with a number of large abattoirs across the UK, including the likes of ABP and Dumbia. And we've been working to merge these sources of data together for a genetic evaluation based on commercial carcass traits data, which we've called the National Beef Evaluation. Now, traditionally, on the beef side of things, we haven't actually had any direct measurements for carcass traits for use in genetic evaluations, because as you might imagine, it's quite difficult to breed from an animal that's been slaughtered. And so the measurements that we use as a proxy are usually growth and ultrasound scanning. They're generally recorded in pedigree herds, which are usually smaller than your commercial herds, and particularly in the case of ultrasound scanning, the traits are expensive to measure. And so having access through these relationships that we've developed with abattoirs, then we actually now have a source of a huge amount of commercial data running to the tens of millions of records. So the traits that we have information available for are days to slaughter. So we're looking for animals that will get to finish earlier for a given carcass weight. We've got the carcass weight in kilos, and that is variation in carcass weight at a particular slaughter age. We have carcass fat and conformation that are based on the Europe grid scores, which showed you the grid earlier. And we're also able to use information on carcass weight and days to slaughter to calculate the average daily gain in the carcass in kilos per day. So as I mentioned, the phenotypes in this case come from UK beef processors. A lot of the pedigree that we get comes in from BCMS. It's a particularly important source in terms of your commercial crossbred animals. And then we fill in gaps in the pedigree from a number of sources, including the beef breed societies and also the milk hoarding organisations that Marco mentioned previously. So once we've got that data, we can then plug that into the evaluation to try and partition the sources of variation and work out what variation is due to genetics and what is due to the environment. And so the heritability of a trait is actually what proportion of the total variation we see is variation due to genetics. And these traits have a really good heritability. So we're looking at between 35 and 45% of the variation that we see in these traits is down to genetics. So there's really, really good potential for us to make progress in the performance that we're seeing from the calves that go into the beef supply chain by choosing the right genetics to breed them. So I've got an example, pop back a bit, Marco. Just on the right hand side here, I've got a distribution of estimated breeding values for days to slaughter in the Angus. And so these are all high accuracy bulls. And there is getting on for a 200-day difference in the breeding values for these sires, which when you convert that, and I'll talk about this in a minute, if you convert that into the expected progeny differences, then you could see 100 days of difference between progeny performance from the best and the worst sires. And when you think about that, if you can get animals off farm over 3 months earlier, then you're looking at massive reductions in your feed costs. You're looking at those animals being on farm emitting methane for a shorter amount of time. So it can also reduce the intensity of the emissions that we've got in the beef sector, which is obviously something that is being highlighted pretty much every day. So once we've got these genetic evaluations in place, we run the evaluation 3 times per year, and that is alongside the dairy evaluations. So new results come out in April, August and December of each year. But obviously it's all very nice to have the data, but unless we make them available to industry and to farmers, then it really doesn't have that much value. So the evaluation in this case, it's not one evaluation per breed as we traditionally see in beef evaluations. It's actually a multi-breed and crossbreed evaluation. So we've got animals of dairy origin, animals of beef origin, and those crosses all coming in together. And so data for purebred dairy animals moves over into the dairy carcass index after the evaluation, and data for beef animals and crossbreds is disseminated via the AHDB National Beef Evaluation. And if we move on, here's an example of what it looks like. Apologies that some of the writing is a little bit small. So the data access is mainly via a standalone website, which is at the top of this slide. And it's got the animal details down the left-hand side, and then we've got a pretty standard breeding value chart on the right-hand side. So we have each of our traits, one below the other, and then in the middle of the chart we have the breed type average, with lower performing animals with bars to the left-hand side and higher performance to the right-hand side. The EBV and the accuracy values are to the right-hand side of those bars. Now, it's probably useful to highlight, given that the audience has got a dairy focus, that on the beef side of things, we actually publish estimated breeding values rather than predicted transmitting abilities. So in dairy, you're directly looking at what the impact is on the progeny, whereas in beef, we're looking at the genetic potential of an individual animal as a parent. So if you want to convert your EBV into a PTA, all you have to do is divide it by 2, because it's 50% of the genetics that are coming from this sire whose data you're looking at. The other thing on the right-hand side is the accuracy value, which is a measure of confidence in the data. And what you would usually see in dairy is a reliability value. The reason that we use accuracy in beef is because there's a little bit less data traditionally behind the evaluations, and accuracy allows you to differentiate small differences between animals at the lower end. If you square the accuracy, you'll get a reliability, and that will be able to have you identify differences between animals that are of very high accuracy, and that's why the dairy industry uses reliability. Because we've got a multi-breed and crossbreed evaluation, it's just worth saying that it is the only source of beef information where you can actually compare EBVs across breeds. That's within breed type, because we've obviously got some differences between natives and continentals in terms of production systems that they suit. But for example, you could directly compare genetic values of an Angus bull with a Hereford, or a Charolais with a British Blue, for example. Now, although we have a standalone website, we're very aware that on the beef side particularly, there are a lot of places, different places that you have to go to look for genetic information depending on your breed of interest, and that's because performance recording is contracted by individual breed societies rather than being run centrally, as is the case with AHDB dairy. So we do want to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to access the data. And so we've worked with providers such as BreedPlan and Signet to be so that we can look on an animal's record on the main database for that breed, and then we can go directly through to the animal record on our evaluations. So if we just click on the view from EBVs from the AHDB National Beef Evaluations, then if you click that through, it will take you directly through to that animal's breeding values. So how can we use the data? So there's many different ways we can use it. 3 of the main ones, we can assist individual farmers in making their herd breeding decisions. You know, it might be that you have your specific set of breeding goals for your replacements, but you also have a particular route for your calves that are going into the beef supply chain. So you can talk to your contractors about that and understand what it is that they're after, and whether your current animals are performing as well as they could be. They can also be used, and they are being used, to inform breeding company trials and bull marketing decisions. And they can also be used to refine selection of bulls for inclusion in premium schemes, so that we're really encouraging people to use beef semen from animals whose progeny will produce more profitable carcasses. Now, as I said, the breeding companies are looking at that information already. It's not necessarily as visible to you via them as you might like it to be. So just to say, you as a customer have much more influence in what they share with you than I do as part of a levy body. And so the best thing that you can do is, if you want to see this information directly in the catalogues to help you with your breeding decisions, tell them, because they will respond to market signals. So the more noise you make about it, the more likely it is that they're going to do what you need. So there's a limiting factor in all of this, and we've touched on it, and it's that particularly for commercial animals, the pedigree is coming from BCMS, and that's the only source of pedigree that we actually have. And when you go to register your calves in BCMS, you'll probably already be aware that although it's compulsory to enter information on the dam, it's not compulsory to enter sire details. And so what that does is, if we don't have information on the sire, then we can't really create genetic links between relatives, and it means that we actually have to discard information from the evaluation. So in the latest evaluation, we have thrown out over 6 million carcass records because we don't have sire available, and so we do not have the links that we need to be able to put them into the analysis. Now, the table that's just popped up is looking at the average of the percentage of sires recorded in the decade between 2011 and 2020. Overall, we're looking at about a 30% of sires are recorded. It's a little bit more in purebred beef, and it's lower in terms of the dairy side and beef cross dairy. We will get a little bit of information through from your milk recording, but the you know, if you know which straws you're using, if you know your sires, I would really highly encourage you to input that information into BCMS when you're registering calves, because this lack of data is really negatively impacting the breadth and the accuracy of our evaluations. As you can imagine, if we could put that extra 6 million records into the analysis, then it would, sorry for the pun, but it would really beef up the evaluation. So since 2019, AHDB have been running the Shout About the Sire campaign to encourage and remind people to record known sires in BCMS. We don't advocate guesswork. Not everyone can do it. You know, there may be a number of people on the call at the moment who actually use mixed straws when they're inseminating with beef, and in that case, then you know that you've got a choice of 3, but you don't know which one has actually been the successful parent. And so in that case, yes, absolutely leave it blank. But I would hazard a guess that there will be at least some people that have farm records that have the insemination details, but because it's not compulsory, it doesn't get recorded into BCMS. I'm obviously a very strong advocate of EBVs, but if there is one change that you make from what you've heard from me in this webinar, if that one change is recording sire on the passports, I will be absolutely delighted, because by doing that, you are indirectly impacting and improving the industry by allowing us to use that data in evaluations. And at that point, I'm going to hand over to Marco again to summarise.
Okay, thank you, Alex, well, for that part. So really just very quickly, just for me to summarize what you've heard in the session today. So I started off talking about the dairy side of things, how you can identify, well, first of all, what your breeding objectives are. So use the tools that are available to you to understand your breeding objectives, but also I would encourage you to write it down, because once you write it down, it becomes more a set and a much stronger target. And as I said, it also allows you to talk to others on your farm about your breeding goals and see whether they can help you improve along the way. I highlighted some of the tools that we make available through AHDB. So the herd genetic report is a very useful report, and again, I would encourage you to sign up if you're not already, if you're milk recording, because it can help you to highlight fairly easily what your strengths and weaknesses are and what you need to do to improve that situation. It also helps you to highlight females that are suitable to breed replacements from, and then consider whether genomic testing can help you in your situation to make a more rapid advancement in your genetics and really help to pinpoint which genetics you want to progress in your herd. We then talked about the well, how you pick your dairy sires, again, making sure that they suit your breeding goal, and some of the indexes that are available also to maximize calf value. And the value of sex semen shouldn't be underestimated. And I guess in the UK, with now over 70% of dairy inseminations being sex, I think we're well on the road to making sure that we optimize the use of that. And once we do that, obviously, then it's a matter of maximizing the value we get from our beef sires and the beef crosses that we get on farm. And picking the right sires is very important. So do make sure you use the genetic indexes again, because we know that genetics underpins performance. If we use beef bulls that have got the right genetics, they will improve the calf value ultimately that goes into the supply chain. And as Alex highlighted, if you, particularly for the beef industry, if you know the sires, make sure you register that on BCMS, because it can enhance the valuations ultimately that we return back to you. So hopefully with that, it's it's highlighted again some areas that you may have already heard about, but it's reminded you of some of the stuff, and it may have pinpointed some new areas for you to think about. But hopefully it's been useful, and I'll be happy to answer some questions if any occurred. So I guess we can have a bit of discussion if there is any.
Thank you very much, both. And yes, some questions have come in. So if you're happy, I'm going to read the questions out, and if the most appropriate person could answer, please. So the first one, what is the reliability difference between using genomic testing and using parent averaging?
Okay, so it's a little bit breed dependent. So we offer genomic evaluations for 5 different breeds, the Holstein, the British Friesian, Ayrshire, Jersey, and Guernsey. The Holstein has by far the highest reliability, just because our reference population, the amount of animals with genotypes and well, PTAs is much higher. But on a typical Holstein, you're looking at about a 65% reliability versus a 30% for parent average. So it's a double the reliability when it comes to genomic testing. And that's 65% reliability on a female is about equivalent to having 1 or 2 lactations on a milking cow. So as a very young calf, all of a sudden we can see very reliably what the production potential is. But more importantly, probably, is that the reliability that we get for some of the health and fertility traits probably is, will be a lot higher than the majority of cows who have not been genotyped, just because an individual measurement on a milking cow for fertility, for example, is not as reliable as the genomic information that we get. So it's particularly important for some of those health and welfare traits in genotyping calves.
Thank you. And 2 very similar questions. I'm going to ask them both in one go, because I think the answer might cross over. So with many management environmental factors, is calf survival a robust measure? And are there specific genetic traits connected to survivability of calves?
Yeah. So, well, in my presentation, I already highlighted some of the environmental factors that we are aware of. So month of calving, the age of the dam, whether it's a single or a twin birth, male or female, and all of these environmental factors we correct for in our system. And because we look at it on an individual farm basis and within a certain time period, we then can see, well, given the environment that these calves are kept at, some calves are just better able to survive than others, and that's purely due to the genetics of those animals. And because we're then looking at a progeny group, so we're looking at a large group of progeny from single sires, we do really pick out those sires who've got progeny that are able to survive stronger. Now, what's underlying that? There's a whole host of things. It could be scours, it could be pneumonia, it could just be are they thrifty cows? Are they keen to drink? Yes or no figure. There's probably a lot of reasons that contribute to a longer survival, but ultimately what we are interested in is whether these animals survive. And if we can just breed simply for improved survival, underlying it, we will improve the general resistance or figure of those calves going forward. And although the heritability is low, I've also shown you that when we use bulls that are at the top end, the better survival ratings, we can clearly see that they've got a much stronger survival probability in the progeny. So it's don't underestimate the value of genetics.
Thank you. Any chance to set up a specific index for selecting breedings to improve colostrum quantity and quality?
It's a very good question. I think there is an interest, and I'm aware that there's a PhD student currently looking at the possibility of doing it. So likelihood is there will be. It is a heritable trait, but unfortunately, because it's not collected on a national scale, a lot of farmers will do it for themselves, but because that data doesn't flow into the evaluation system, we can't evaluate it at the moment. There has been, well, I've had some discussions to say, well, can we record that on a national scale? So can we actually collect that colostrum data that is being picked up on farm or that is being measured on farm. So yes, it likely is heritable. We likely can breed for it. There's a bit of a question, well, when it then comes to calf survival, maybe if we can pinpoint dams that are breeding better, have got better mastitis or quality, that we can actually feed that colostrum to the calves that really need it. We know that it's not always the dam itself that contributes that colostrum to the calf if they freeze colostrum, but yeah, it probably is heritable. We probably could do something, but unfortunately we haven't got the data currently to be able to do it.
Thank you. If we're selecting for calving ease, at what age will that calf catch up? And is there a sweet spot to sell a calf to buyers?
It's not necessarily the case that if we breed for calving ease, I'm assuming that the question really alludes to, well, are we breeding for smaller calves and that's the problem. It's not always the case that these will give us a lot smaller calves, and I guess that's where breeding values can really help us. It's I've highlighted in my talk, I highlighted the fertility index, and initially we had a concern that if we bred for fertility, we would have to sacrifice production, because we thought, well, because these two traits are correlated, we can't have end production and fertility at the same time. But actually, we now know that it's very possible to select bulls that are very good production and good fertility, and the same is true for calving ease and calf quality. We can find those bulls who have got a better calf quality, have got calves that grow quicker, and are calving ease. So I don't think it's one or the other. Maybe on average they may be a little bit smaller, but if we can breed those animals then rapidly grow using the breeding values that Alex has highlighted, we can still get a good quality calf. And Alex, I don't know if you want to just
yeah, I'd probably just add in, if we're looking specifically at beef, if you're saying, you know, we want to be able to sell them on, if you're getting semen from breeding companies that's being marketed specifically as beef on dairy, then those animals are most likely to have been extensively surveyed, and they would not be marketing them for use on dairy if they were hard calving. So they know the importance of easy calving, and they're providing that for you. What there will still be is variation in those carcass breeding values, variation in the genetic potential in terms of the carcass. So you should absolutely be able to select animals that are going to give you better growing animals without having a negative impact on calving ease.
Thank you. And I think we've got just about enough time for one last question. Are there specific traits to look for in a beef on dairy cross animal?
Do you want to answer that, Alex, or?
I guess it depends what the animal's being used for. So it all depends on what your market is. If you're sending them off to a calf rearer when they're going to go into the beef supply chain, then it's going to be very much around the carcass traits. If you're looking at maybe selling on crossbred heifers to be used as you know, crossbreds in sucklers in the future, and you've got a market for that, then what you might want to look at is a little bit more of the maternal side of things as well. And on the in the beef element of that would either be looking at the pedigree evaluations, or also what we have introduced just in August is we've now got 3 maternal traits in the National Beef Evaluation that have been extracted out of BCMS data. So they are looking at age at first calving, productive lifespan, which is the number of parities an animal has by the age of 6.5 years, or death, whichever comes earlier. And we do have a beef version of calf survival as well. So if you've got crossbred females that you're specifically looking at whether they might be useful as suckler replacements, then they might be traits that you'd like to have a look at as well.
Thank you very much. Were you going to say anything else then, Marco?
Well, I was just going to say this, we know there can be a specific challenge for some of the smaller stature crosses, some of the maybe spring block calving herd who who's well, struggles to get the right quality beef cross calf out of the herd. And tomorrow morning there's a webinar, so I guess there's a little bit of a plug. If that's a specific issue for you, then I'd encourage you to listen to tomorrow morning's webinar, which specifically deals with getting beef from some of those crossbred calves, crossbred herds.
Thank you very much, Marco, and you can sign up for that via our website as well. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much both for presenting today. Thank you to our audience. Some great questions that came in there as well. So remember, this has been part of GB Calf Week. There's a whole plethora of activity going on throughout the week, across the weekend also, and into next week. So please have a look at the links that we've put up, have a look on our website for any more information, and use hashtag GB Calf Week to keep the conversation running on social media. Thank you very much all, and hopefully see you for another webinar very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.